It's only Friday. That is the sentence Ducati needed the paddock to believe, because a 1-minute 28.526 lap record at Buriram is not just a fastest lap. It is a structural interruption. Marco Bezzecchi did not edge the field. He detonated it. Plus 0.421 seconds to the defending world champion on a factory Ducati is not margin. It is separation. And in a compressed season opener weekend, separation becomes leverage. Aprilia didn't flirt with the front. They owned it. 3 bikes into Q2, clear direction through winter, updated RSGP stable across both sessions. Bezzecchi led FP1 and then backed it up under rain-threatened practice conditions when riders abandoned race simulation to chase top 10 security. That context matters. When everyone pivots to pure time attack, raw pace is exposed. And in that environment, Aprilia was not surviving. It was dictating. Ducati could be running conservative mapping or evaluation loads on Friday. But conservative mapping does not explain nearly half a second in identical late-session attack windows. If it were 0.1 or 0.2, you could argue program variance. 0.421 is structural. Marc Márquez followed Bezzecchi home in second. That sentence alone would have sounded absurd 12 months ago. In 2025, Marc clinched his 7th Premier Class title at Japan with 5 rounds remaining. 11 Grand Prix wins, 14 sprint wins, record-setting doubles. Then, the Indonesia collision fractured his collarbone and ended his season early. He disappeared. He healed. He returned at Sepang in February and immediately went P1 day 1. That is the weight of Marc. But Friday in Thailand did not belong to him. He was not untouchable. He was chasing. There's a difference between being within striking distance and being the reference. Marc was within striking distance. Bezzecchi was the reference. That psychological shift matters because Marc is not passive when hierarchy tilts. He processes threat as opportunity. He attacks where it hurts. But anger alone does not close 4/10. Ducati placed 3 machines into Q2. Fabio Di Giannantonio completed the top 3. The GP26 is not weak. The system is not collapsing, yet the insulation is thinner. For the first time since Marc joined the factory team, Ducati did not look inevitable on Friday of round 1. And then there is Pecco Bagnaia, 15th, plus 1.298 seconds off Bezzecchi. Outside Q2 again, that's the headline. But headlines simplify. He was not lost, he was active. 6 time attack attempts inside a single practice session. In and out, in and out. No continuous lap sequence long enough to stabilize rhythm. That is not confusion, that is urgency. Sector 2 was where he bled time. Sector 2 at Buriram demands mid-corner stability and drive compromise. If you miss entry load transfer by a fraction, exit acceleration punishes you. Pecco's deficit concentrated there suggests setup imbalance rather than total pace absence. If the front-end load window is narrow, repeated time attacks amplify instability. That aligns with what we saw, fragmented lap building. But urgency reveals pressure. Pecco does not need to prove speed to anyone. He is a 2-time world champion. Yet, 6 attempts signal that something inside the garage knew Q2 was slipping. And when Q2 slips, sprint grid positioning becomes a variable. And when sprint grid becomes variable, championship risk begins. This is not Ducati versus Ducati anymore. Aprilia entered winter promising direction change. They delivered pace with clarity. Bezzecchi did not stumble into the lap record. He built it. Di Giannantonio briefly took control. Bezzecchi responded. Final attack, 1M 28.526. Clean, decisive. If Ducati believed 2026 would mirror 2025's internal civil war between teammates, Friday rewrote that script. This season may not be a runaway for anyone, and that is dangerous for Marc, because when Marc is comfortable, he controls. When Marc is threatened, he escalates. But escalation against Honda in 2016-2019 meant surviving a violent machine no one else could tame. Escalation now means defending a crown inside a factory that expects dominance. That is different architecture. Bezzecchi did not win a race on Friday, but he shifted the weight. And once weight shifts in MotoGP, it rarely shifts quietly. But it fractured the illusion that Ducati would dictate the tempo of 2026 the way it dictated 2025. Because this time, it isn't Ducati versus Ducati. It is Ducati being asked questions it hasn't had to answer in a year. Aprilia didn't just place Bezzecchi at the top. They put 3 bikes directly into Q2. That matters. Depth matters. When a manufacturer can send multiple riders into the pole shootout session, it signals baseline stability, not one-off brilliance. The RSGP is not carrying one hero lap. It is carrying structural confidence. Ducati also sent 3 bikes into Q2. On paper, parity. But the difference is reference. Bezzecchi was the benchmark. Ducati were reacting to it. Marc was plus 0.421 behind the lap record. Close enough to strike, but not close enough to intimidate. And intimidation has been Ducati's hidden currency since Marc arrived. Now focus on Pecco, 15th, plus 1.298 off the pace. That's the headline. But the deeper fracture is rhythm. He went out 6 times in 1 hour, 6. That is not the behavior of a rider experimenting calmly with race trim. That is a rider chasing entry security under time pressure. Each return to the pit lane resets temperature cycles, resets mental flow, resets front-end confidence. If the bike window is narrow, repeated time attacks amplify that narrowness. Sector 2 was the bleeding point. Sector 2 at Buriram demands precise front loading through direction change, followed by controlled rear release on exit. If the front-end feel is inconsistent, the rider either overslow entries or risks mid-corner instability. That hesitation compounds through acceleration zones. Losing 2/10 in a sector like that multiplies through lap time. This could be pure setup miscalibration, not psychological instability. A front ride height or stiffness imbalance can expose exactly that mid-sector deficit. But 6 attempts suggest the team believed the window was reachable and couldn't stabilize it. That's different from confusion. That's volatility, and volatility inside the factory garage matters because of who sits next door. Marc is not in a rebuilding phase. He is defending. He already proved in 2025 that he can take a Ducati, internalize its strengths, and convert it into dominance. 11 GP wins, 14 sprints, clinched with 5 rounds remaining, then injury, then silence, then return. He does not need to prove speed, but he does need to defend territory. And territory defense operates differently than title chase. When Marc senses hierarchy tilt, he compresses risk, not expands it. People mistake his aggression for recklessness. It isn't. It's calibrated pressure application. If Bezzecchi leads into turn 1 tomorrow, Marc will not wait 3 laps to measure him. He will test braking stability immediately. If Aprilia's entry stability is real, it will hold. If it was Friday mapping and tire peak, it will fracture under proximity. That is where sprint changes the geometry. Friday is time attack. Sprint is compressed warfare. 20+ laps become 13. Tire management window shrinks. Early position becomes decisive. Bezzecchi must now prove was not a singular combustion moment. He must defend pace under disturbed airflow, under Marc's front wheel, under Ducati's acceleration pressure. Because here's the shift no one is saying out loud. For the first time since Marc joined Factory Ducati, the defending champion is entering a race weekend without being the undisputed reference. And that alters garage psychology. Aprilia's winter direction change is not cosmetic. They carried momentum from the back end of 2025, where Bezzecchi closed the season with 2 wins. That confidence did not evaporate over winter. It matured. When he rolled onto Buriram Friday, he did not look like a challenger hoping for opportunity. He looked like a rider expecting it. That expectation changes throttle application. Meanwhile, KTM placed 2 riders into Q2. Honda placed 2 into Q2. The grid density is tightening. Ducati cannot assume traffic clears itself. And this is the real fracture. Ducati 2025 was internal civil war. Marc versus Pecco. Ducati 2026 is external siege. If Aprilia can match race pace, Ducati must divide attention. Do you stabilize Pecco's Sector 2 instability? Or refine Marc's marginal gains? Resource allocation under frozen engine regulations becomes finite. You cannot brute force new power. You must optimize what exists. This is no longer a cakewalk narrative. Even if Marc wins tomorrow, he will not cruise there unopposed. And if he loses the sprint, the psychological ripple multiplies. Bezzecchi is fast. Marc has been fast for 13 years in the Premier class. The question is no longer who can produce a single lap. The question is who can sustain pressure when the other refuses to blink. And tomorrow, blinking will cost more than grid position. It will cost leverage. Beating Marc Márquez when he is defending champion is not the same as beating him mid-cycle. It is a different war, because a defending champion does not race for validation. He races for control. Marc entered 2026 carrying the weight of 2025's dominance. 11 wins, 14 sprints, a title secured 5 rounds early. Even the Indonesia injury did not dilute the authority of that campaign. He left early because he could afford to. The points margin was untouchable. That is insulation. Friday in Thailand chipped at it, not destroyed it, not collapsed it, but chipped. And when insulation thins, Marc responds. Sprint and Grand Prix are not time attack exercises. They are stability audits. In clean air, Bezzecchi delivered 1 Mila 28.526. That is the fact. In traffic, under disturbed aerodynamics, braking markers shorten, front load changes, rear grip overheats. The RSGP must now prove it can defend under compression, not just explode in isolation. If Marc lines up alongside him into turn 3, he will not hesitate to occupy apex territory. That is not aggression for show. That is strategic suffocation. Force the rival to adjust trajectory, force tire temperature spikes, force micro errors. Aprilia may have genuine race pace superiority and superior mid-corner balance that survives proximity. If that is true, sprint telemetry will show stable degradation curves under pressure. If not, the Friday advantage compresses. This is where Bezzecchi's title value argument becomes real. If he wins this championship, it carries more weight than recent ones. Strip emotion out. Analyze mechanism. To defeat Marc on a factory Ducati while Marc is defending would require out-qualifying him consistently, surviving early lap aggression, matching sprint intensity across 22 rounds, absorbing factory counter-development under frozen engines, maintaining mental equilibrium when the defending champion escalates. No one has yet dethroned Marc in a season where he entered as defending champion. That's not mythology. That's structural context, and it raises the ceiling. But ceilings are not broken on Friday. They are broken when race pace confirms the illusion was real. Pecco remains the unpredictable variable. He was not confused, he was unstable in rhythm. Sector 2 lagged. 6 exits signal urgency. Tomorrow Q1 likely manageable if raw pace exists. But Q1 costs laps, costs tire sets, costs mental clarity. If he emerges into Q2 already burning rubber allocation, sprint grid suffers. And if sprint grid suffers, Marc absorbs internal leverage. That's the internal war layered beneath the external siege. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Marc angry is not chaotic. Marc angry is analytical. When he is challenged, he does not swing wildly. He studies. He sees weaknesses. He attacks where structural stress is highest. If Bezzecchi overcommits defending early, Marc will test exit drive. If Aprilia's mapping overheats rear grip under sustained slipstream, Marc will bait that degradation. If rain arrives, Ducati's baseline stability under variable grip becomes a weapon. This season will not be a runaway for anyone, but it will not be gentle either. KTM has placed riders into Q2. Honda has 2 inside. Grid compression increases probability of interruption. Every overtake costs tire life. Every defensive move costs rhythm. And rhythm was already fragile for Pecco on Friday. Bezzecchi's magic run is continuing. That is undeniable, but magic is fragile under sustained assault. Pace must survive contact. Marc has survived 13 years in the Premier class. Different machines, different injuries, different eras. His adaptability is the most under-discussed weapon in the paddock. He won with a violent Honda many called untamable. He won immediately on a Ducati many thought would demand transition time. That pattern suggests adaptability, not comfort dependence. Ducati may still possess hidden margin under race configuration, and Marc's Friday gap could shrink dramatically under full-tank simulation. If that happens, the half-second narrative dissolves into normal fluctuation. But if it doesn't, if Bezzecchi defends position in the sprint, if he withstands first-lap compression, if he repeats dominance in race pace, then the leverage shift becomes structural. then Ducati 2026 is not an internal duel. It is a contested battlefield. If Bezzecchi wins this championship by defeating a defending Marc on factory Ducati, it will not be remembered as a Friday miracle. It will be remembered as the year insulation cracked and never resealed. But if Marc responds the way history suggests he does, surgically, methodically, without panic, then this practice session becomes a warning shot that awakened a predator. Tomorrow is not about grid slots. It is about hierarchy. And once hierarchy is questioned in MotoGP, it rarely returns quietly. GP24 doesn't cover MotoGP. We document its wars. Subscribe and enlist.